In the span of just 11 months, everything you thought you knew about Xbox seems to be vanishing. Exclusives? They don't even use the word exclusive anymore, and they ported 4 of their games to PlayStation and Nintendo and have made it clear they're going to start shipping games to those platforms day and date. And when it comes to day and date on Game Pass, they moved it to Ultimate and then raised the price of Ultimate. So anybody holding on to what was once the vision for Xbox was having a tough time, and it got even more difficult in the recent weeks. Phil Spencer did a round of interviews and made it clear there was no red line in their catalog. This means something like Gears of War or even Halo could land on a platform like PlayStation. He also said they didn't see a way to get more users with a $1,000 console, and while he was being a little bit hyperbolic, his point was, we are not fighting the power fight anymore. He even made that clear when he took a little bit of a shot at the PS5 Pro and acted like a mid-gen refresh doesn't do anything for the customer with respect to value. He sees unique value in putting games in more places and not increasing hardware power, which typically leads to better games and better running games. He did say that there is a handheld coming, but he also indicated that it is a few years out. This was a bit of a shock to the system for people who thought in the near future Xbox would have some kind of an answer to what PlayStation was doing with the PS5 Pro, but it seems that runway is set up for them all the way to the PS6. And then the new marketing for Xbox hit. They basically called everything an Xbox. If you have a smart TV, a tablet, a phone, a Fire Stick, doesn't really matter. It's now considered an Xbox. It felt very out of touch with gamers, especially the Xbox loyal, and they just continue to target consumers outside of gaming, attempting to grow their user base with the people who don't typically play games. I want to talk about why this is out of touch and why it won't work, but ultimately, what's the result of all of this going to be? Now, when I upload a video like this, I follow it with a live stream so I can discuss it with you, as well as other gaming news. So if you like this kind of content, hit like and subscribe. Honestly feels weird to see Phil Spencer saying things that feel so incredibly out of touch with what gamers want. The platform that introduced the world to Xbox Live and Halo is now talking like a software company rather than a gaming company. And there are 3 big things that stood out from Phil Spencer's interview circuit that he recently went on. And the first thing that really set me off about Xbox being out of touch, it comes from an interview with Rolling Stone. And we were kind of waiting to do this video because Phil was just talking to more and more outlets. He was talking to Bloomberg, then GameFile, and now Rolling Stone. And their article is titled, Xbox CEO Says There Will Definitely Be Future Consoles, which sounds great. There were people concerned they weren't going to get any more future Xbox consoles. But then, pretty far down in the interview, he said something that really drove home the out-of-touch element for me. He said the following: we think about hardware that can create unique value for our players or creators on our platform. We don't need to do incremental hardware for our own benefit. Does a new device really give you a unique experience on screen in some way? It's less like the old days, going from the original Xbox to 360, that was standard definition to high definition. Now, it's harder to show the benefits. Now, keep in mind, so much of this interview is in the wake of their "this is an Xbox" marketing, and Phil is heavily indicating that unique value for players isn't in stronger hardware. Now, on one hand, I think he's correct. New devices are not leaping as much as they used to as compared to the past, but the leaps are still there and still significant. More than that, hardware power is how you increase value for gamers, because you enable game developers to do more with their game. It's not just about making them prettier or raising the resolution. Stronger hardware allows a developer to do more with the game systems, mechanics, and innovation. I said this the other day, the next Elder Scrolls being available through the cloud on a smart TV doesn't really do much for me, but an Elder Scrolls that looks graphically stunning, has innovative ideas and tech inside of it, maybe more immersive systems for the combat or the RPG elements. Those are things that add value for the gamer. So this idea that Phil is putting forth is just so insanely out of touch with gamers, and the reason is simple. It's a software strategy, not a gaming strategy. Game devs do not start out by saying, well, how many places can we put our game? They typically say, how many things can we put in our game? Because they want the game to be as good as possible. You see, Microsoft thinks about the distribution and the access of something because that's how they treat their operating system and their Office and their cloud-based business solutions. But video games are creative efforts, and giving developers more power and more freedom is far more important than just putting their games in more places, especially when we've already seen so many times this gen, the limited power of the Series S slows down developers, and it even limits what they can do with their game. Sure, Baldur's Gate 3 eventually made its way to the Series S, but the Series S didn't get local co-op. That's just one example of what limited tech does. This is the future of games from Microsoft under the trajectory of what Phil calls unique value. All of this made me realize that Phil's outlook has been out of touch for a while. This is the second thing. It reminded me of the infamous Kinda Funny podcast, where he said they weren't in the business of out-consoling Sony and Nintendo, and he said the following.
There is no world where Starfield's an 11 out of 10 and people start selling their PS5s. It's not going to happen.
When I reflected on this quote during a recent live stream, it kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. He is completely wrong and out of touch in this quote, and not for the reasons that everybody blasted him for. He wasn't saying that we're not going to make good games. He wasn't saying that's not what they want to do. He's wrong because the PS5 Pro and the PS5 sales, that is specifically showing something very different. Earlier this year, Sony shared that roughly 1/3 of the people buying a PlayStation 5 didn't even have a PS4. This means that out of the current 65 million PS5s, roughly 20 million people didn't come from the PS4 era. But according to that Kinda Funny podcast, Phil was saying, well, we lost that generation. That was the worst generation to lose. People were building their digital libraries. Well, how did PS5 get 20 million people to buy one, and they didn't actually come from that generation? They didn't have a library. They bought into PS5 because of the focus from Sony on quality games and having a hardware-centric identity. Everything was about the console and the console power and the great games that you could play there. 20 million people did not have a PS4 library, and they were still motivated to buy a PS5. So, the defeatist attitude from Phil in that interview just couldn't be more out of touch. And that brings me to the third thing. They could have handled this generation so differently. And now that they have this small market of consumers and they're not selling enough hardware, they are once again setting their sights outside of the gaming world. Their recent ad campaign about everything being in Xbox demonstrates this. It's not just the cherry on top of them being out of touch, it's a trajectory and a plan that will not work. This isn't the first time that a high-up executive at Microsoft or Xbox decided that the best plan was to set their sights on consumers outside of the gaming world. I already discussed this in my video called The Xbox Problem, and in it, I look at how the Xbox One targeted non-gamers with their emphasis on TV, and I felt they were doing it again. Well, the huge marketing shift with "this is an Xbox" really makes this abundantly clear. Xbox is looking beyond the console and beyond the gamer. They are looking even beyond PC. There are three big reasons that I don't think this will work. The first reason is it didn't work before. I gave them credit as to being somewhat ahead of the curve with their focus on TV because smart TVs prove that Microsoft had the right idea with the Xbox One, but that console made it very crystal clear. Consumers outside the gaming world aren't paying much attention to Xbox. This is why the marketing just seems so weird. For those of us who own Xboxes, or maybe you're just paying attention to Xbox and PlayStation, the marketing makes sense. You get it. You're like, oh, that's an Xbox now. But imagine for a second that you don't game, and you just see an ad that tells you your tablet, your cell phone, your TV, well, they're now Xboxes. You might say, okay, cool, so what? What does that mean for me? It's kind of like going to people who don't watch sports or buy sports packages and saying, hey, your phone, tablet, and browser are now a sports channel. The sudden shift in access won't change or alter a consumer's interest level. But let's just say that it does for the sake of argument. That's related to the second reason this won't work. There's too many hurdles. The people who talk about how great this is or just how easy it is to set up, they all have something in common. They are already gamers and they're paying attention to the gaming world. If somebody sees a billboard and they inquire about, well, how can I access Xbox on my smart TV? Think about all the things they're going to have to do. they've got to go to the store and buy a controller for around $50, sometimes more. Then they have to pair that controller with their TV, download an app, make an account, and sign up for a subservice. Now keep in mind, subservices are plateauing right now because consumers are growing tired of them, especially due to the rising prices. That's an awful lot of hurdles for someone to overcome just to do something that they've been uninterested into up to now. So that brings me to the last hurdle, and this is the last reason that it won't work. Cloud gaming is not even widely accepted by gamers yet. It's just too inconsistent. It's too dependent on the consumer's internet quality. They could be in an older neighborhood with older lines. Maybe they're on an oversold node. Maybe they get routed to wherever the cloud server is, and it just causes latency and lag because it's poorly routed. You now have somebody that went the distance to do this, well, my TV's an Xbox thing, and then they have a bad experience. So I don't think the target consumer will be compelled to do any of this, at least not in a high enough quantity to justify all the support and all the marketing that Microsoft is throwing at this. This isn't a cheap endeavor from them. Second, even if anybody does this, there's all those hurdles they have to overcome, and then cloud gaming is just too inconsistent to reliably convert anybody who tries it. So, where does all of this lead Xbox? The reason I think that Phil Spencer now sounds like he works for a software company instead of a gaming company is because that's kind of what happened. It's hard to deny that 2024 is the year that Microsoft killed Xbox and put up something different in its place. They clearly are not going to rebrand to Microsoft Gaming. Many speculated that's what they were going to do, but the recent marketing, they say the name Xbox more times than I even said in this video. But if Microsoft and Satya are calling the shots, I think the new ad campaign and Phil Spencer's interview circuit are nothing more than a speed run to becoming a publisher and not really anything else. I genuinely don't think the ecosystem approach is going to yield enough conversions and enough new customers to justify all the focus and the spending. Their mobile storefront has the potential to make a ton of money, and publishing games like Call of Duty on PlayStation will also make them a ton of money. But non-gamers jumping into the ecosystem through their tablets or their TVs, it just isn't going to be enough to move the needle on the Richter scale. And given how Microsoft operates, Xbox will look more and more like a publisher than ever before. Phil's already signaling a diminished focus on hardware, a future handheld and a console that's likely just going to be an extension of their existing efforts, more than a renewed commitment to the console gamer. Because as far as I can see it, turning everything into an Xbox is turning Xbox into nothing. But those are just my thoughts, and I'd love to hear yours. You can leave a comment below, and this will redirect to a live stream that hits the card right here. There'll also be a linked comment below that will be pinned. You can come and join us for that discussion. And as always, if you like this kind of content, be sure to hit like, share, and subscribe.